Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Inside Fashion Design. This is IFD Connect, which is our community platform, and we're happy to share that every Thursday moving forward, we are having a featured guest from the industry. And last week we had our lovely Sloan share her journey, and today we're featuring Brittany Velasquez. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And she has a very, well, everyone has an interesting story. I just love hearing people's journeys and how they've made their way from wherever they started to the industry. And Brittany is not a trained designer or industry person. So it's fun to hear how her journey and how she went from new mom and finding a need and finding struggles and turning that into a business. So before Brittany starts chatting, I'm just going to share my screen here for a moment and give the little introduction to Brittany. And here we go. So everyone, please meet Brittany. And we'll start off, Brittany, maybe part of the story for me, I have a story that goes with this as well. And it's that Brittany reached out to our design consulting studio, Creative Capital Design. Gosh, like 4 years ago, 5 years. How long has it been?
It's definitely been over 4 years because Olivia was close to a year old, maybe. So I'm gonna go with 2019.
Okay, definitely pre-COVID. We still had our studio space.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah, it was definitely then and
really 2019. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so Brittany found Creative Capital Design and reached out to us. And our first meeting, she came up into our office and was just sharing your idea for some product that you were interested in designing and developing. And it was because you had this struggle and this need. And I remember meeting you for the first time and you starting to share that story. And I swear I got tears in my eyes because I could relate. You know, my children are much older, but recalling back to when I was a new mom, and then how you were turning that into this mission and this vision that you had been thinking of and in your brain and how you wanted to address that. So I'd love for you to start with just kind of sharing that part of your journey. And then we'll go through how that led you to become an entrepreneur and how you created your business based on this need and that mission. So if you can start with that, that would be great.
Thank you so much for having me today, Britta. As you mentioned, yes, I became a new mom in 2018, and I never really been around breastfeeding much in my life, but I was really interested and determined to be successful breastfeeding. And I had a really hard time in the beginning. Our first was a cesarean, and I was really dealing a lot with disappointment, if you will, with her birth. And so breastfeeding was what I really hung on to. But I was told postpartum that I wouldn't make enough milk for the baby. And that was truly devastating for me. And I started to work with other professionals in the birth industry and ended up producing a full supply for her. But in the meantime, I live in a very anxious body, and I did not like nursing in public. So I started looking for clothing online. There are some really cute things out there. I bought a few things, and it really helped me feel so much more confident breastfeeding her in public. But after washing and wearing these pieces several times, things started unraveling, falling apart, getting holes in them. And I was chatting with my husband, driving home from a really horrible day at work. I used to work in HR prior to, I'm stay-at-home mom now with 3 kiddos. And I just thought, you know what? I sew at home. I know a little bit about construction and how to put garments together. I want to make my own line out of organic cotton. My husband's from Peru, and Peru is well known for their Pima cotton, and they're also well known for their fair trade and ethical practices for their factories out there. So that is how I got going with the idea, and then it just took off from there.
That's great. I'm just popping through some slides here. And Nunuy is the name of your brand.
Nunuy.
Nunuy.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me just see what else we have here.
Yeah.
So another highlight, of course, of your brand is this mission for ethical and slow fashion. So I love this from your website. If you want to talk through perhaps like how you even started to research finding the yarn, the materials, the makers. And I know, as you mentioned, your husband's from Peru, so you had a little bit of connections there, but you still had to go through this process of sourcing and vetting the makers and going there and all that. So could you share a little bit about how you approached that, and even some of the challenges maybe that you faced
Absolutely.
trying to get through all that process?
It is a huge process. There were several times throughout the process that I kept thinking, wow, this is so hard. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. But if you just keep going, you can usually get over those hurdles. But as you mentioned, yes, my husband is Peruvian, so I had a little bit of a foot in the door. He has two brothers out there that were able to help me get some information and find some people. And you even recommended a couple factories that you knew of out there for me. But it is a lot of reaching out and back and forth. And when you're such a small fish in this big proverbial sea, you don't really get prioritized. So you have to keep reaching out and contacting. And then when you're working overseas, there's also the language barrier. So my husband helped me in a big way, learning to create really short sentences and being very concise and bullet points, and helped me really learn to speak to them better. There's also cultural differences. You need to make an introduction, ask them how they're doing, and learn certain things about the culture in order to communicate with them where they feel respected, if you will, and like you care and you're someone they want to work with. So there were all these different angles that I had to come from, and it took a while for me to get comfortable with it. And sometimes even just a Google search isn't enough. So I have been to Peru 4 times now. The first time was before I created the business. I just went to meet his family before we got married. I did all the touristy things, went to Machu Picchu and hiked on the Inca trails. And that was also what gave me the inspiration behind the name. The name is a Quechua term, which is the language of the Incas there. It's still spoken today. And Nunuy literally translates to breastfeed. And then another struggle I really experienced was, unfortunately, in Lima, especially, which is where I'm producing the clothing. They don't breastfeed very much out there. It's very rare to see a breastfeeding mom. So they weren't really understanding what I was trying to accomplish with my styles. They constructed things incorrectly. They edited the patterns sometimes thinking that they were trying to be helpful, and it was not helpful. So there was really a lot of back and forth in that sense. And that's why they call it slow fashion. So if you are doing these fittings and getting your samples back, you change the fit a little bit, then you have to get another sample, and you're just at the mercy of other people's schedules. And so it takes a long time, a lot longer than I anticipated, like 18 months to 2 years from the concept until you have that product in your hand. And that's if everything is moving along smoothly.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. And so the only thing right now, I'm getting ready to manufacture 2 new pieces with the same factory. But it would be really nice in the future if I could branch out and maybe have another factory, so I'm not relying completely on one factory. But with my mission and vision for the company, It's extremely important that I work with makers that are in alignment with how I want my clothing made, and safe conditions, people that are paid livable wages, no child labor, things of that nature. I learned a lot about the fashion industry. And while I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination, I learned a lot of the bad that happens in the fashion industry. And I think that that's my goal here, is to shed a light on how there are some really awful things happening in certain parts of the fashion industry. Um, and that's why I said here in this little excerpt, someone somewhere is paying for it. There really is no such thing as cheap fashion.
Right. I have experienced the same thing as far as pattern adjustments and working with Asia or other makers overseas, is they often do kind of assume or think they're helping you. And
Mhm.
oftentimes they are, like they could have production suggestions or construction suggestions that could save you money or make things quicker, that kind of thing. But as far as the communication goes, it definitely is challenging, and they might sometimes take it upon themselves to make a little tweaks here and there. So it is super important to have that communication established. And you are fortunate to be able to go there in person so many times to work with them. Do you have any advice for someone that couldn't travel there, and how would you suggest best to, I guess, number one, like vet them to make sure they truly are ethical and no child labor? And that's hard to do because a lot of it is hidden behind the scenes.
So true.
But any suggestions or advice for someone who couldn't maybe travel to their maker, to kind of get that relationship going and make sure everything is up to standards that your expectations are?
Sure, that is a great question. I think the main thing, um, my maker has a website, and so I think that might be the first step. I feel like doing some of your own research online with the company's name. If you know of anybody out there that might be able to talk on the topic, it's interesting. I mean, the fashion community is large, but also small in a sense. I feel like so many people are connected and know each other once you get your foot in the door. I think video calls are really helpful. I've done video calls with the factory, especially when they weren't understanding certain things about the construction. And I mean, it really is just about relationships. When you build that relationship with the factory, they're usually so much more willing to help you out when you need it. But you are so right about figuring out if there's no child labor in the working conditions. I would honestly ask for videos or photos. Can you send me some pictures of your factory? I'd love to see the space. And ask about the working conditions. What are you doing to make sure that the working conditions are safe? Even just asking about their, how do I want to, like their procedures and their protocols. Where do they find their makers? How long have they been with the company? Those types of questions. And in my opinion, if they're not willing to answer those questions, that's a red flag.
Yeah. And I think you would get that suspicion, like from their responses, if they're kind of skirting around the issue or not answering directly. I think that would be for sure an indication. You could kind of tell and get the vibe if they're hiding something.
Absolutely. And when it comes to like sustainable and ethical fashion, there is no such thing as perfect, but my biggest thing is transparency. If you're transparent about it and you're literally not hiding anything, some people might say, oh, I don't want to give away my factory's name, but I mean, who cares? Because if no one, it takes a lot of work to start your own apparel line, and not everybody might have the means to do that or even be interested. And so I don't feel like you're sharing secrets. And I'm also, I really love the phrase community over competition. When you lift, especially as women, I think when we lift each other up, really wonderful things start to happen instead of trying to compete with each other and keeping secrets, if you will. So I don't feel like I'm giving things away. I feel it's just radical transparency, and people care about that.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love the message that you were saying. It's not perfect,
No.
being ethical and sustainable is very difficult. It's
Yeah.
very challenging, and you can prioritize and pick what you can do, like
Yes.
you did, and then, as you said, be transparent about all the rest. And even if, you're something you're doing is not sustainable, maybe your material isn't fully recycled, can't be recycled. If you're transparent about your vision and your goals for the future and what your plans are and your strategy for working towards hitting those goals, that's wonderful for a consumer to hear, because they know at least then that's what you're aiming for. It's steering the Titanic, from fast fashion to slow fashion. It is a very slow process. And I think as brands slowly can implement some of these things along the way, we're moving forward. We're moving in a better direction. So it's going to take time, and you picked kind of your priority and what you can achieve now, and what you have achieved in your brand so far has been fantastic. And you have been transparent about that. So that's a really wonderful thing. And as far as supporting each other and sharing resources, 100% agree too. And back when I was starting out in the industry, everything felt so competitive.
Oh,
Even with employees,
yes.
who's going to be promoted, who's going to be the next, head designer of this,
Yeah.
within this category of that company, or what have you. And everything was very closed in, and you didn't share. It was, that's mine. I found it, I own it. I'm not going to give away my secrets and all of that.
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned that as well, of just, and the factory that you're using, if you shared that with another, someone that was trying to create a brand, that just builds the factory up, which gives more resources for everyone to
Agree.
use them. They could have more sewers, which supports their local economy. And it's
Yes, absolutely.
all can be used for good. So wonderful
Yes.
points.
Thank
And yeah, I was going to say, so part of what you wanted was this organic Peruvian cotton. Peru is known for the Pima cotton. Can you tell a little bit about, because I know you have your makers, right? But then you also have to source the materials. So how did you go about finding, I don't know, getting swatches, requesting things to sample, and how did that process work for you?
So my second trip to Peru was with Olivia was already with us, and I was pregnant with our son Enrique. And I visited 3 factories while we were out there. And I'm very grateful. The factory that actually sews my clothing, it's basically 2 businesses. There's an owner for the cotton part, and then an owner for the factory. And so they do source their own cotton right there in Peru. And when I went to visit the factories, there was another factory. I actually visited a factory that makes some of Prana's clothing. And that was really interesting. It was a really beautiful spot. They brought you into this big conference room where you could actually overlook the entire factory, which was really, really neat to see. And the only thing is their minimums were so high, I just could not justify making 1,500 pieces of each style that I have. So that's why I chose the other factory. Their minimums were much, much smaller. And so the sourcing was a little easier for me in that sense, because the factory, they do their own, they work with the farmers right there in Peru to harvest the cotton. So I didn't have struggles in that sense. But I am wanting to branch out. Peru is also known for alpaca, and it's warmer than wool. And if you use baby alpaca, it's quite soft, very sustainable. And they harvest it out there in it's non-cruel. I can't remember the right word to use, and this is me not being an industry professional showing why. I can't remember the term they use, but Yes, they're kind of the animals. The animals aren't harmed in the process. And I love alpaca. They're just, they're so darn cute with their big eyelashes. And so someday
Yeah.
I would like to branch out into that. And I am struggling a bit to source the baby alpaca, but I'm not ready to use it just yet. And you'll have to forgive me. I wasn't sure what else you were asking in the beginning of that
Yeah,
question.
no, that's fine. One thing that I really admire about your approach to business was that you started with 3 pieces,
I did.
right? And as a designer myself, I want to make, 10 different things and all these different colors and materials. And
Did I,
you were
Britta?
so, you were so focused and zoomed in, narrowed in on what your key styles were. And I think that's a really admirable way to start the business. I mean, it's also, I'm sure it was budget was a big part of what you can
Yes,
afford. Because with each piece, obviously you had to do, design, get the design details and construction worked out, make patterns. And
yes.
as you mentioned, every time something is adjusted, it's a new sample.
Yeah,
Sampling fees are much higher than your production fee by garment.
correct.
So I found that really fantastic that with very minimal styles, you launched an entire business.
Thank you.
And now as you move forward and as you grow, you can slowly add in, those additional pieces with the alpaca or sweaters
Yes,
or whatever you're thinking. So you don't have to have a lofty, big collection to launch something. So if someone has an idea, I think starting in that manner is the most economical. It's the safest. If for some reason it fails, you haven't put in tens of thousands of dollars, which can
right. Or
easily be
hundreds of
spent.
thousands.
Yeah, yeah. We used to get quite a few inquiries through Creative Capital Design, our design consulting studio. We get these emails and they'd say, "Hey, I have an idea for a menswear line. I want to make, you know, 10 jackets. Can you guys do that for us?" And we would we would be replying, "Well, okay, what's your budget?" It was the number one question. And then when they saw how many iterations it could take to make even one blazer or
I'm gonna
one
say, especially
style,
with outerwear, sure.
yeah, it's just so how you went about it, I think it was just so smart and it's succeeding. As you mentioned, I know you don't sell much wholesale right now, but
Right.
you do have garments at Mary Rose Boutique.
I do.
Or
I love Juliana is
yeah,
just one of the most wonderful human beings. And yes, she took a chance on me and it is selling wonderfully in her store, mainly to women that are not breastfeeding.
yeah, I was there, 2 weeks ago. We had the
Yes,
Meet the Maker
yes.
event that I attended, and I was I didn't get to try one on, but I wanted to try on one of your dresses because it just looks so comfortable. And I travel and it does not look like a breastfeeding garment. It looks like a dress you'd wear to the office. So one of these days I will try one on,
You
but
should.
yeah, it's such a good point that you can wear these anytime. And if you're done breastfeeding, the
Yes.
garments are still fantastic basic pieces to have in your wardrobe that, you can throw a blazer over to make it for the office or with shorts for the summer.
Absolutely. And one thing I love about Pima cotton, I don't know how, but it seems to get softer with each wash. And I'm not going to say never because there is a chance, but it almost never has the pilling, those annoying little balls that form on your clothing. It just stays soft and almost looking brand new wash after wash. I've washed my dress and my blouse. I wear them so often. I've had to have washed them 100 times by now, and I still want to just rub the cotton up against my face because it's just so soft.
Yeah, it is one of the
The
most
cotton, you will know
beautiful
it's
cottons.
Pima cotton. Yes.
Yeah. Do you know about their growing methods or dyeing methods? Because I know it's organic cotton, but
Right.
do they do other things like in the dyeing process to be, I don't know, chemical free? Are they dyed with natural coloring or?
Yes. So they shared a bit with me when I asked about their dyeing process. They do a few different things. They will use natural dyes as much as possible. So if you think like reds, they tend to use beets, and they'll use other things to do some natural dyeing. And they also are involved in, I'm not 100% sure how the cotton turns brown, but they grow this natural brown colored hue, and no dyeing involved. And it's just some beautiful, beautiful colors. Peru also, where usually the cotton is grown in the northern part, off the coast, so it's a little more tropical. Where my husband's from in Lima, it's a little bit like Portland. It's gray and drizzly and a little bit cool. And then when you cross the Andes, then you're in the Amazon, and it's much more tropical. And so in the northern part of Peru is where most of the cotton is grown. The main difference with this cotton as opposed to traditional cotton, they use less water to grow, and they hand harvest everything. So they don't bring these big, huge machines in that just are tearing the cotton apart. Everything is hand harvested. And so that also, more money for labor, but it results in a much higher quality cotton, that you can literally tell when you touch the fabric, this is different.
That's amazing. And I'm sure it's much better for the land too,
Absolutely.
so that they can keep the growing going with less damage to
Absolutely.
the actual.
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing that I learned from my husband, because it's really rare to find, when you're out there visiting, like, or properly quote organic produce. And he said, well, two things: it's really expensive to get that organic certification, and most farmers, they just simply can't afford it. And two, again, they really can't afford to be using all these pesticides. And so most of the produce you'll find out there is essentially organic. It's just not quote certified. So I found that really interesting that they even, they call the land out there Pachamama, so like the motherland,
Mother Earth.
And yes, Mother Earth, and they treat it so differently than most of us.
Yeah, a lot more respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's great that you pointed out the excuse me, the certification, because we found that too. If you're in the industry and tried sourcing things, many times the company cannot afford to get that certification, because it requires, the inspection, and you have to pay for all these things. And so doing your homework and research, still considering places that are not necessarily certified, but doing your homework, because they could be doing everything in an ethical, sustainable, eco-friendly manner, but they just don't have the actual stamp that they were inspected and certified, because it is very expensive. So that's a nice thing to have called out and be aware of. And on the screen, I wanted to talk through this a little bit, because this was so fun for us. This was through our design consulting studio, again, Creative Capital Design. When Brittany first came to us, she shared, obviously you wanted this to be like a Peruvian inspired. And so we worked with you to come up with some inspiration and color ideas and things that just would tell that story that you were trying to convey. So this was a mood board we did, and I love the mountains here with these colors that are just gorgeous.
I haven't visited that yet. That'll maybe when the kids are old
on your next. Yeah, that's on my bucket list as well. Nice. I did get to go to Machu Picchu, but we didn't make it to the mountains here. Yes. And then you also had some inspiration for what you wanted in the dress. And these were some images that we talked through, and things that were inspiring, and kind of sharing your vision of what you were seeing for your collection. And here's an example of a sketch that we worked with you on, and looking at, okay, this is for breastfeeding moms. How do we build in the panels and the modesty and still make it look fashionable and trendy, and you could wear it to the office, or you could wear it just around your neighborhood, going out for coffee. So this was a sketch that we came up with. Pockets were really important to you. Yes. And then we're showing here the inside of how we were going to build, the inside layers, that you could have the panels and the accessibility to breastfeed. And then the top,
Mhm.
So these are some ideas for the top. And again, like these are all fashion, you know, fashion right. I mean, I wouldn't consider these super trendy. These are kind of classic style blouse that a woman could
Exactly.
wear for multiple uses.
That was my goal, was I didn't really want it to go out of style.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a quick view of some of the sketches we were talking through. And then this is where you landed, was these three styles. And I know you have some garments behind you. You're sitting in your
Yes.
actual workspace
I
today in your office.
yes.
I think what I'll do is stop sharing the screen so that we can see you bigger. And
Yes.
if you want to talk through some of the pieces and show them, that would be wonderful.
Sure. I'm still our latest baby is 9 months old and I am breastfeeding. So I'll wear the clothing as often as I can. Let me see if I can get a better view as I step back. I don't know if you can get a little lower. So this is the blouse, and I have only two colors right now, and eventually I'll go a little. Can you hear me okay still, Britta?
Yep, all good.
Um, I would like to get more color options, but that means selling through more inventory.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, since you brought that up, what were the minimums per color, per style that you ended up
So
getting with the factory?
they allowed 200 per color, and I needed to pick two colors. So I did 400 of each piece in the beginning. So I had like about 1,200 each that came in from Peru. And then
Okay.
these next rounds, I somehow managed to talk them into a little bit smaller minimums, because my sweater and the jumpsuit are a lot, to make them is quite a bit more expensive than when I made the blouse, the tank, and the dress. Pima cotton prices have gone up for one.
Mhm.
And then because it's more fabric, I'm using a French terry for the sweater, and then the jumpsuit. And I struggled with this in the beginning too. I wanted, because I was so maybe focused on, no, I wanted 100% cotton, all organic. I am putting some spandex in the jumpsuit, because if you're pulling a jumpsuit, because you got to take the whole thing off to go to the bathroom,
Mhm.
you're pulling and getting in and out, it's just going to keep getting stretched out, stretched out. So that's where I made the choice. I was like, okay, it's still 95% organic Pima cotton, but there's some spandex in it, but that's necessary for this style with the dress and the tank. And the tank, even it's really interesting. I thought it would get really, really stretched out, but once you wash it, it all recovers and looks brand new again. And the tank was also designed to be an underlayer. So even if it does get a little stretched out as you're using it, nobody really sees it, because I wanted it to be an underlayer. So you
Layer.
can literally wear it under any shirt and have privacy when you're breastfeeding. Because I never really liked just pulling my breast out. Having something to cover my chest just made me feel a little more, as you said, modest.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you're wearing the draped
I'm wearing
blouse.
the blouse, yes, and it has elastic in the waistband. I've seen some moms pull it up higher, so you've got a little more of like a poof at the bottom, or you can pull it down to make it a little more form-fitting. It's just a, I don't know what to call this, Britta.
The yoke, the back neck.
Little higher, and then
Yeah.
the tank is underneath, so you just pull, and you could wear anything under here. I've even worn like a cute little lace bralette, and so like if it like pokes out, it can, in
It's
my,
cute.
yeah, it looks
Yeah.
really
Well,
uh,
and that blouse is that the outer layer doesn't have any it's not doesn't have like another opening for breastfeeding. It's just literally an overlayer that you wear over something. So that could be for anyone. It's doesn't have anything specific that's like an opening for breastfeeding.
absolutely. And these blouses have, as I said earlier, sold really well in Mary Rose, the boutique in Oregon City. Just I've sold really, I was really impressed with her.
You know, if you were shopping in there, you see the rack of your items, you don't even know. Like you pick it up, it just looks like a dress until you read the tag and see you would never know. So,
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. Was my intention. For the dress, I go right to the little shirt layer, but as I said, I mean, I can also show the dress here in a minute once I'm done with the tank. But as I said before, she's sold so many of my dresses, like a really great amount of my dresses, and I think maybe one was a breastfeeding mom, just one.
wow.
And then one woman came in, she was a veterinarian getting ready to go to some conference. She bought both dresses, one in each color, and came back and said that everybody kept complimenting her. She wore a turtleneck underneath it, put like a little jean jacket on. And she says she wore it 3 days in a row. And
People,
yeah,
yeah, that's brilliant. That's
really flattering for me.
That's great. That's great. And I was going to mention the items that you're working on that have like the jumpsuit with the spandex, fully transparent. As you said, you're saying that outright. You're not trying to hide anything. And then the other thing to consider is that's going to make that item longer lasting.
Yes.
So that is a good, I think, something to point out. By using the spandex and having that in there, that garment's going to last a lot longer. So you're buying less and you're keeping your wardrobe to, minimalistic. And, so there's pros and cons. But yeah, but like you said, if it got worn out and stretched out, then it's going to be dumped. So just adding in that little bit of stretch for recovery will make that garment last a lot longer, and people get more use out of it, and they'll be buying less and disposing of less. So
absolutely. And
yeah.
Even this cotton, it's a knit, so it's not a woven. So there's some stretch to it without needing the spandex, which even my husband made a comment. He's like, this has spandex in it. And I said, no. It's just, it's got a little bit of a natural give to it with the way that they knit the yarn.
They knit it. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. So you have the tank top underneath?
I do. Yes. So the tank has like a little, so when we first did the dress, this was the idea for the dress. And then I ended up totally changing the bodice on the dress. But so the tank, you just come in from the side and pull here, and then you've got your chest is still covered, but easy access to get your unclip here and then pull open to feed the baby. And that's what this was designed for. So technically they go together, but this blouse you can put over anything, and you can put the tank under anything.
Yeah. And I love the idea of wearing, if someone has a little lacy camisole or another nursing bra type thing, it would,
with the armholes, it can like poke out a little bit. And I find it, for me, my fashion desires, I like that a lot.
Yeah. Great.
And then I could bring the dress a little closer to see. I'll move some stuff out of the way.
So I'm curious, as we're getting a view of your office there, are you, I assume you're shipping and packing orders yourself as they come in online?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. But my space is right out back of my house. When we bought this house, there was a detached garage here, and my husband is a wizard with home remodeling, and he built this whole place for me, installed windows and a bathroom and a little kitchen area, and with the ideas of using it in the future as an office. And then as the business continues to grow, I'll need a different space to fulfill orders as things grow.
Yeah, it's exciting though. It's
perfect.
That's great.
So here's the dress. And as we talked about, we were going to do it on the sides here, and then ended up doing a lift up access. So lift here, and then you've got one on each side. And the cotton is just so soft.
Yeah. And I know it's a little hard to see on the black garment, but when you see this in person, it kind of looks like two pieces, like a skirt and a top, because that top part is loose that you can lift up. But again, it does not look like a breastfeeding dress, a nursing garment. It looks like a layered dress. And
here's the blue. Maybe it's a little easier.
Yeah. You can see.
Yeah.
Could you lift up the layer part? Because then you can see, yeah. So it's completely hidden under there and it's just like another layer of material.
And I have even seen some dresses that have this at the waistline and they're not designed for breastfeeding. It's almost like a little like flowy shirt over it.
yeah, it's connected, but it makes it look like it's two
Exactly.
pieces.
Exactly. And you can also just tie this in different ways. I like bows, and so I usually do the bow, but there are different ways you can get creative with tying the tie here. And to me, that was also really fashionable. I've seen things in that one picture you had on the mood board was from like the final scene in the movie Hitch with Will Smith. And I don't know, I just love, and even like Drew Barrymore, she has all these big like neckties and bows and stuff that she uses. And so that was my inspiration behind the tie on the.
It's kind of vintage in a way, with the bow. It makes it feel like a vintage style.
I love bows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Oh.
So you had mentioned that you're working on some new styles.
Yeah.
So as far as development goes, is the factory now able to provide for you patterns? Did you give them sketches? How did you go about that process? Say someone is interested in doing this and doesn't know how to, how do you get that first pattern, or how do you provide, you need a tech pack or you need all these things. So I'm curious how you've proceeded past the point of where, you and I work together on styles and now you're adding. And I know oftentimes factories, if they know that you're going to produce there, they will create the pattern and work with you on fittings and absorb that cost into the production. So not necessarily charging you upfront for all these other steps. If you don't produce a style, you're going to get billed for all that development process. But I'm kind of throwing in a couple different points there, but how are you adding new styles and what's the development process for you on that?
So I was getting some pattern, samples done with a different factory, but I wasn't super pleased with the quality I was getting back. So I decided to stick with my current factory, and they actually prefer that you do the patterns and the tech packs and send. I've even asked them for small pattern modifications, and they were really kind of like skirting around it and not saying no, but also not saying yes. So I think that they prefer you come prepared with your own, oh my gosh, what do they call it? Intellectual property. My one thing about working with the factories, if they develop it for you, typically you don't get to own your pattern and your tech pack. And so that was a little scary to me. I would prefer to own my own intellectual property, even though I pay a lot more out of pocket to keep that. But once the development is done, you don't have to reinvest that money. You can just continue to make more in the future. So I ended up doing my pattern making with Dawn at Portland Apparel Lab. However, she is not staying in the industry. She got snatched up by one of her biggest clients, which is unfortunate for me, but
it's for many of us. We used her quite a bit, and she is fabulous and she has the 3D browseware program too, so you could do the patterns, which it reduces the amount of sampling and patterning work going back and forth. And so
much higher, but yes, it's a really awesome tool. And we used it on the jumpsuit because I did 7 pattern iterations with the jumpsuit to get it where I wanted it. So it has taken me, we started this in the beginning of 2022. So I'm 15 months in, and I'm finally ready to go ahead and start manufacturing.
Yeah, an item like a jumpsuit is definitely a lot more complicated and fit intensive. And so I think just pointing out to people that, because I think that's another misconception is there's so many brilliant ideas out there for apparel or some item or brand without someone being necessarily from the industry. And so explaining and conveying, I guess, the understanding that it can take that many iterations, maybe even more, you know, to perfect something. And every single time it's an investment, it's money, it's another round of a sample sewing and
Yes.
all of that. So,
Shipping,
and
which like breaks my heart, but it's like my one of the things that I regretted in the beginning was I had the sample making done here in the States. And my first round of samples cost me more than 6 or 7 more rounds with the
from
factory,
them.
including
Yeah.
shipping.
Yeah. That's the other
So,
thing to keep in mind is, and
yes.
fittings, often you're in a rush. So very often they're FedExed. And every time you FedEx, it's, I don't know, 100
Money.
and whatever dollars.
Yep, it's usually around
So,
$100 for me to ship something from Peru. Yep.
yeah. So it definitely takes, you know, you have to have a budget, obviously, to do this. And another point that you said I wanted to highlight and reiterate is owning your pattern. And when we do work with clients through Creative Capital, we encourage that. Again, there's pros and cons to each method, but if you own that tech pack and that pattern, you can send it out to 5 different makers if you want and get a costing quote from them. If they made it and then you want to add another factory in, you know, they did the work, they covered it, and you're begging, and it's like pulling teeth to get that information, even though it's your design. They're the ones that set that up. And so they, I don't know legally if they have to give it to you. I don't know what the what the legalities are of that. I don't know if Jim would know, but oftentimes they just say, sorry, you know, it's ours. We made it for you. And if you want to go to another factory, you're starting over again.
Yes,
So
that is a really good point. And then you also just never know what happens if the factory goes out of business and they just shut down and then
yeah,
gosh.
or there's a fire. I mean, how many times in, you know, even big companies, big name brands, they have everything in one factory and the container on the boat
Oh
sank,
my
or there was a
gosh.
fire and they lost inventory. And there's so many things that can happen that you have to think about and be prepared for. So, but you have done an incredible job of figuring all this out, probably very often the hard way, just by
Yes.
doing it yourself and then having setbacks and learning from mistakes. And but I admire you so much for just taking your vision to where you first thought of that to where you are now, and your brand has launched and you're selling, and it's just
Thank you, Britta.
just great to see. And Jim just put in the chat, the factory owns the pattern engineering unless it was, you know, specified in the beginning that you had some sort of agreement.
That
So
makes sense. Thanks,
yeah,
Jim. That totally makes sense. And
yeah.
that was another reason why it was so important. My husband has a good friend that is in the industry out there. He helps like place people with factories, and he said, oh, we can make the patterns for you out here. And so I started asking a bunch of questions. When I first learned about Dawn, before you work with her, she has you go through like a manufacturing 101 class because she wants you to know everything that was involved. Very helpful as someone that's not part of the industry.
Mhm.
And when I was asking these questions, it was nice because you sound like you've done your research, so they take you a little more seriously. And B, yeah, he's like, well, that's not really how it works. No, you don't get to keep the patterns. And I was like, then I'm going to do it here, even though it was probably like a third of the cost to have them help me develop. I want to own my patterns. What if I
Yeah.
wanted to do a special small run here, even in the States? I can just give them my pattern and my tech pack and the samples I already have. So
Yeah, that's great. And there is something to be said for having the first samples done in your town, in your vicinity, so that you can touch and feel and really see the fit. Because then when you pass it to the factory, you've already got a kind of established, you know, what is the drape? What's the look? Where is it more fitted? Where is this? Instead of, you know, maybe takes off some of that, the reiterations from going directly to the factory, because they may not know the fit intention, or, you know, make it big all over, or whatever the case may be. So hopefully, you know, some of those steps can save time in the long run. And so yeah, there are pros and cons to each, and it's just a matter of figuring out, I think, like you said, you know, your budget, your key styles, and to the point of what Dawn had you go through when you came to us, you had already done that. So compared to some other inquiries we get, you already knew, you were like, this is my customer, this is what I'm going after, these are my priorities, this is, what my plan is. You had all of those things in place. So I highly recommend, not since Dawn's not available, but
No.
just finding, Googling, going online, like, what do you need? What are the basic steps in the design development process, which you can find by Googling. There's tons of information, but really doing your homework, and it's thinking about the reality. How long is it going to take? How much money is it going to take? And you being fully have gone through the whole process now, just hearing that it does take that long. It could take 2 years to get a fitted, perfect garment that you're ready to go to production with. But again, slow fashion.
If you want to do it the right way, yes. I've heard horror stories of people just sending a pattern and going ahead and manufacturing without actually doing a fitting. And I'm like, just because a sketch looks good doesn't mean anything. Or you're just in a rush trying to get it done, and then you end up making a mistake or something didn't come out right, and then you're stuck with all this inventory that is incorrect or not to your liking.
Yeah, that's very much fast fashion, that they don't really care about necessarily the quality and the fit. And they maybe do one round of checks and go and produce thousands of pieces and sell it for $9.99. And you get what you pay for. So your garments are not high priced. They're very reasonable and
thank you.
Long life and investment pieces that we've said several times. You don't have to be breastfeeding mom to wear them, and still look very stylish, and a great wardrobe item to have in your closet. So any other things you want to highlight? Where can people reach out to you? Your website?
We can definitely post some things in the platform if that's fine. But yes, my website is just Nunuy, Nunuy apparel.com. And I am on my social handles. I'm Nunuy Nursing Apparel on Instagram and on Facebook. I have a LinkedIn that I don't use very often. I probably should get a little more active on that. But all my contact information is on the website, but I'd also be happy to post it in the comments here on the event.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll definitely post. So in the platform, it's IFD Connect is the name of it, and it's insider.inside fashion design, which you can also find on the main Inside Fashion Design website. It just has a link to it. And it's a free and all-inclusive platform for industry pros, as well as just fashion fans who are curious about the industry and focusing on conscious design and ethical and sustainable methods, and building up a community so we can support each other. And I keep saying, thinking of it as a social media platform that's private. It's not Instagram or Facebook. It's completely private, but you can use it just in the same as a social platform to share your work, share images. Sloan, who is on the call today, has been posting images of her beadwork that she's working on, and her progression of that. So it's growing and becoming a fun space for a community, just for support and sharing. And so we're very happy to have you as a guest today. And we will follow up with a replay recording of this and all of the contact information for you and your website and whatnot. So I so appreciate your time and sharing your story. And it's inspiring, and hopefully for other people as well. So
I really appreciate you, Britta. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Brittany.
Bye. Thanks, Brittany.
Have a great day.